So let's begin with some current issues, in particular the case of Julian Assange. In the latest court hearing on Julian Assange's extradition case, WikiLeaks' legal team requested more time to submit evidence and asked for a postponement, which the judge denied. The full proceedings on Assange's extradition case will begin on the 25th of February, even though observers at the hearing, such as John Pilger, an investigative journalist, stated that Julian Assange couldn't even formulate a proper sentence at the court hearing. Niels Menzer, a United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, has also reported that his imprisonment and persecution is threatening his life and amounts to psychological torture, which the UK court and the government have simply ignored. What is your assessment of this case, and what significance does it have on press freedoms and investigative journalism?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what the UN Rapporteur of Torture has assessed here. We're talking about several years of isolation, right? I mean, what does that do to someone, especially at coming out that the CIA was spying on essentially every single encounter that Julian Assange had with people who were visiting him in the embassy, lawyers? I mean, all of these things should have remained confidential. It was an absolute betrayal by Lenin Moreno and the UK government. He was tortured. And this was before he was actually put in this confined cell, facing 175 years in prison under the Espionage Act. This case has incredibly wide-reaching implications then. Unfortunately, Julian Assange has already been tried in the court of public opinion. People loathe him and they think that he, cost the election for Hillary Clinton, when really, in reality, if you look at these charges, they have nothing to do with Russia. They have nothing to do with the 2016 election. They have everything to do with exposing war crimes. We're going back to 2003. I mean, the Iraq war cables, war crimes that were committed, the collateral murder video. These are what the charges come down to. And if people really understood how devastating it is to actually charge a publisher under the Espionage Act, which has never been done before. I mean, the Espionage Act was, of course, used flagrantly by the Obama administration. Now it's being used by the Trump administration against whistleblowers, which is already horrifying enough to resurrect this archaic law during World War I to now charge people who are whistleblowing war crimes and things like torture. But now to use it against a publisher, this could mean New York Times, Wall Street Journal. It could mean you or me. It could mean anyone that simply publishes leaks and analyzes them just like all of these publications do. So I think this case is absolutely devastating, horrifying, and wide-reaching implications for press freedom and journalism as a whole. And unfortunately, people have already made up their mind about Julian Assange. They're not taking a stand the way they should be, because this is a case that affects us all. And if we don't stand up and say no more, I fear we're in for a really dark road ahead. I think there's silence on this issue because there's a direct collaboration between all of these governments that are essentially puppets or criminal collaborators of the U.S. empire. The fact that Trump, kind of went outside of the norm to seize someone out of an embassy that they were granted amnesty in, and charge them with the Espionage Act for simply publishing leaks and covering leaks. I mean, it's really unprecedented, Zen. And I think that all of these collaborators are guilty of the same crime. I mean, anyone who's not standing up and saying that this is an absolutely atrocious and criminal assault on journalism is complicit, and they're participating in this criminal act. But I think that that's exactly why they're staying silent on it. Of course, they're not going to come out and say, yeah, unfortunately, Julian Assange was tortured for the last couple of years, and he is being tortured now. I mean, we still can't muster to explain that solitary confinement is torture in this country, and we use it all the time. So it's devastating. I think that people need to wake up and inform themselves and act out. I mean, speak out about this issue, inform people that these charges have nothing to do with Russia, they have nothing to do with the election, that they are about exposing war crimes. And if we're going to lock people away facing 200 years in prison for exposing war crimes, what kind of country, what kind of world are we going to live in? So we have to stand up and collectively say no more.
This huge hype about the importance of whistleblowers for democracy when an information came out that Trump blackmailed the Ukrainian government to get dirt on Joe Biden that he would like to use against him in the election. However, I want to focus on the whistleblowers that were not brought into context of this discussion, and this includes Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and also the investigative journalist Julian Assange. Talk about the Green Party's position on them, and let's say if they win the election in the upcoming presidential election, what would happen to these whistleblowers and investigative journalists?
Well, number one, we would stop prosecuting them, and we would release them from their punishments. You know, Julian Assange is being tortured and actually murdered, in my opinion, and I would say in the Green Party's opinion, before our very eyes. I would say in anyone's opinion who's actually informed. And let me just mention the work of Nils Melzer, who is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, who had no sympathies for Julian Assange when he was basically asked to take on the case to see whether there was a case of torture being inflicted on Julian Assange in his 7-year confinement in the Ecuadorian embassy. And he has really come out swinging for Julian Assange, basically saying that what's going on there makes an absolute mockery of our system of so-called justice. The cases held up against him, Melzer describes as highly irregular, and I would use probably stronger language myself to say that this is, this really does make a mockery of our judicial system. And he's been the subject of a smear campaign, many smear campaigns, for at least the last 7 years or more. Why? He is being punished, as is Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, for releasing the truth. And the truth that does not reflect well, that in fact exposes lies, torture, war crimes on the part of governments, particularly the US, but governments all over the world. So Assange in particular ruffled a whole lot of feathers by releasing this information that was either stolen or leaked regarding the Democratic National Committee and its tilting the playing field. Some have called it rigging. Some inside the Democratic Party have called it rigging of the primary against Bernie Sanders. Exposing that has really inspired the fury of the Democratic establishment against him. So, people have abandoned him, and it's pretty terrible. And that includes the press. And it's, in my mind, this is like the classic case of that saying, first they came for the gypsies, then they came for the communists and the Jews. This is coming home, this kind of totalitarianism, which is persecuting. In Melzer's words, Assange is not being prosecuted, he's being persecuted. This kind of persecution against a whistleblower really undermines some of the basic foundations of our democracy, our need for a free press, which needs whistleblowers in turn, because whistleblowers are really critical to holding power accountable. So under a Green Party, administration, Julian Assange, the charges against him and the extradition effort would be absolutely dropped. He would be held harmless. In my view, he should be compensated. I believe the UN has called for that as well, and they've come out as well saying that he is a victim of arbitrary detention, and it gets much worse from there. So yeah, we need to, I think, rightly respect, thank, and give gratitude to these people who have really sacrificed their livelihoods, their lives, literally, in order to protect our basic liberties.
They are getting Julian, then they will get you, me, everyone. This is a clear struggle for freedom of the press and for the right of citizens to know that which governments are doing behind their backs, supposedly on their behalf. Julian has never been charged of anything. His name has been dragged through the mud over the Swedish case. Even progressives were cajoled into believing that he was running away from Swedish justice on the rape charges. And whenever the supporters of Julian were pointing out that Julian would like nothing more than to face his accusers in Sweden, But the only reason why he's not getting out of the Ecuadorian embassy is because he knew that there was a secret national security apparatus ready to pounce upon him from the United States, simply because he embarrassed the security apparatus by revealing all the information that we now know and cherish regarding the massacres in Iraq, in Afghanistan, the CIA papers in 2017. Even progressives were cajoled into thinking or saying, oh, come on, this is paranoia. He's simply trying to avoid facing up to the charges in Sweden. Now we know, because by an accident, by a cock-up in the United States, the authorities have actually published the charges that are being laid against him, which are effectively spying charges, which means that if Julian steps out of the Ecuadorian embassy, he will be arrested by British police, then he will be extradited to the United States, and then we will never hear from him again. It will be like Chelsea Manning. He will disappear into the Guantanamo-like system. Even his lawyers will not be told what he's being charged with, and that is only for the purposes of making sure that people like you and me and our audience and everybody else out there do not have access to the dirty secrets of our security apparatus, supposedly in our name.
Let's start with Julian Assange. In the last interview, we talked about what his case means for press freedoms. Can you talk about what people could actually do to protect Julian Assange and press freedoms?
For a start, people should disengage from the debate about Julian's personal failures or advantages. No one is perfect in this world, and this is not a question of personal ethics. It is a question of freedom of the press. The only reason why we know about Julian is because through WikiLeaks, he created the infrastructure that allows whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning to let us know of crimes against humanity that are being perpetrated in our name. The only reason why he's now withering in Britain's Guantanamo, Belmarsh prison, is precisely that. So we need to organize public support for effectively our own right to know. And we need to do it everywhere.
Julian Assange has performed an enormous service to all the people in the world who treasure the values of freedom and democracy, and who therefore demand the right to know what their elected representatives are doing. And for that very reason, he's one of the most dangerous criminals on the face of the earth, pursued with savagery by the rulers of the free and democratic societies. And there's a reason. There is a basic principle of government that's well understood by serious analysts. Actually, it was explained quite clearly by the professor of the science of government at Harvard University, the distinguished liberal political scientist and a government advisor, Samuel Huntington. He observed, I'll quote him, that the architects of power in the United States must create a force that can be felt but not seen. Power remains strong when it remains in the dark. Exposed to the sunlight, it begins to evaporate. And he gave some telling examples concerning the real nature of the Cold War. He was discussing U.S. military intervention abroad, and he observed, I'll quote him again, that you may have to sell intervention or other military action in such a way as to create the misimpression that it is the Soviet Union that you're fighting. That's what the United States has been doing ever since the Truman Doctrine. And there are many illustrations of that leading principle. Well, Julian Assange has committed the grave crime of exposing power to sunlight, which may cause power to evaporate if the population grasps the opportunity to become independent citizens of a free society, rather than subjects of a master who operates in secret. And that's a choice. And it's long been understood. In fact, it has long been understood that the public can cause power to evaporate. The one leading thinker who understood and explained this critical fact was David Hume, writing on the first principles of government in one of the first modern works of political theory, almost 250 years ago. His formulation was so clear and pertinent that I'll simply quote it. Hume found nothing more surprising than to see the easiness with which the many are governed by the few, and to observe the implicit submission with which men resign their own sentiments and passions to those of their rulers. When we inquire by what means this wonder is brought about, we shall find that as force is always on the side of the governed, the governors have nothing to support them but opinion. 'Tis therefore on opinion only that government is founded, and this maxim extends to the most despotic and most military governments, as well as to the most free and the most popular. Actually, Hume underestimates the efficacy of violence, but his words are particularly appropriate to societies where popular struggle over many years has won a considerable degree of freedom. In such societies, such as ours, force really is on the side of the governed, and the governors have nothing to support them but opinion. That is one reason why the huge public relations industry, the most immense propaganda agency in human history, developed and reached its most sophisticated forms in the most free societies, the United States and Britain. That institution arose about a century ago when elites came to understand that too much freedom had been won for the public to be controlled by force, so it would be necessary to control attitudes and opinions. Liberal intellectual elites understood that as well, which is why they urged, to give a few quotes, that we must discard democratic dogmatisms about people being the best judges of their own interests. They are not. They are ignorant and meddlesome outsiders, and therefore must be put in their place for their own interests, of course, quoting highly respected liberal intellectuals. One device to control the population is to operate in secret, so that the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders will stay in their place, remote from the levers of power, which are none of their business. That's the main purpose for classification of internal documents. Anyone who has pored through the archives of released documents has surely come to realize pretty quickly that what is kept secret very rarely has anything at all to do with security, except for the security of the leadership from their domestic enemy, their own population. The practice is so routine that illustration is really quite superfluous. I'll mention only one current case. Consider the global trade agreements, Pacific and Atlantic. In actuality, investor rights agreements masquerading under the rubric of free trade. They're negotiated in secret. There's an intention of Stalinist-style ratification by parliaments, yes or no, which of course means yes, with no discussion or debate. What's called in the United States fast track. To be accurate, they're not negotiated entirely in secret. the facts are known to the corporate lawyers and lobbyists who are writing the details in such a way as to protect the interests of the constituency that they represent, which is, of course, not the public. The public, on the contrary, is an enemy that must be kept in ignorance. Julian Assange's crime is to violate the fundamental principles of government, to lift the veil of secrecy that protects power from scrutiny, keeps it from evaporating. And again, it is well understood by the powerful that lifting the veil may cause power to evaporate. It may even lead to authentic freedom and democracy if an aroused public comes to understand that force is on the side of the governed, and if it can be their force if they choose to control their own fate. We should all thank Julian for his courage and integrity in providing us with this precious gift at great cost to himself, much to our shame.
I want to thank everyone before me who spoke, and there is not so much to add to all the things that were already said on stage. I only want to quote Julian, who has been my friend for the last 10 years, and who has one sentence that he kept repeating, and this is, if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth. And by this maxim, he was always acting. And don't be confused by all the character assassination that you read about him. As a person who knows him, I can assure you most of it is just a big lie. And that's why I also want to quote him again and say that he also encouraged me always by saying, courage is contagious. And I'm also very happy to have this letter by another very famous whistleblower who also sacrificed all of his life for us, Edward Snowden. Thank God he is not in prison, but in exile in Moscow. And it is a shame for the free Western world that Putin in Moscow had to give him asylum and no other country in the free West dared to do so. Shame on you! So now I will read you the letter that was given to me on last Friday, and also greetings to all of you who came here today. For years, Julian Assange has warned that the moment he found himself outside political asylum, the government of the United States would demand his imprisonment. Warnings that in each of those years were discounted by his many critics as ridiculous, but today have been shown to be true. By the government's own admission, Assange has been charged for his role in bringing to light true information that exposed war crimes and wrongdoing perpetrated by the most powerful military in the history of the world. The full and single charge for which Assange stands accused is trying, and only trying, to aid the source of many of the last decade's most important stories in preventing her discovery as the only soldier in the United States military at that time brave enough to inform the public about a secret that never should have been hidden in the first place. No one today disputes that the revelations of this source, Chelsea Manning, were news of the highest order. They were immediately carried on the front pages of every newspaper in the world. It is not just one man who stands in jeopardy, but the future of the free press. Thank you very much.
let me first say that when Julian Assange was still free, he held a speech in front of Occupy London where he made a brilliant joke. I guess most of you watched Life of Brian by Monty Python. If you don't know what Julian did, go to YouTube and watch it. It's really funny. He said, "We are all individuals." And then most of the people who were gathered here, like in Monty Python, repeated after Julian. But let me say, this today is not a joke. We are not all individuals. We are all Julian Assange, not because Julian Assange is in Belmarsh prison in a British Guantanamo. We are all Julian Assange because something much more than just an individual is in danger here. What is endangered with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning in prison is our collective right to know, not more, not less. We are here today in front of the Brandenburger Tor because something much more than just an individual is in danger. Yes, a human being with a great sense of humor and a great sense for justice is in prison. But what is really in danger here is the very foundation of our democracy, namely the freedom of press. As long as Julian Assange is in this or any other prison, to paraphrase a speech which Ronald Reagan gave just in front of this Brandenburger Tor in 1987, it is not only the German question that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. What is the German question? The German question is the question whether Germany will stand up and take its historical role in protecting whistleblowers, publishers, and the freedom of speech. How would you know that the NSA and the US government, by the way, hello to the US Embassy who can hear us here, how can you know that the US government and the NSA spied on the German government, the German institutions, and on the German citizens if there wasn't the revelations of Edward Snowden? How would you know about all the crimes committed in our names if there weren't the billions of leaks published by WikiLeaks? Why is it illegal to reveal secrets, but it is still legal to undermine democracy? What happened to Chelsea Manning when she rejected to testify against WikiLeaks? 56 days ago. She disappeared. Literally. She's still here. Her body is in the prison. In the same way, Julian Assange's body and mind is in prison. But the voice of Chelsea Manning is not here today. And the voice of Julian Assange is also not here today. She can't speak, and Julian Assange also at the moment can't speak. This is the reason why we are here today. This is the reason why we are giving the voice to Chelsea Manning, to Julian Assange, and to everything what they present. Do you remember the book by Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451? You probably know most of the topics which occur in the book. You know, people, firefighters who are burning books. But does anyone here remember the end of the movie? Or the book? At the very end of the book and the movie, what happens is that all those people who were reading books, who were using books in order to find out the truth, and also in order to build a better humanity, a better world, hide in a forest. And they hide in a forest, and since there are no books in society anymore, each and one and single of them learns a book by heart. So each person becomes a book. In a situation in which people like Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden cannot be with us today here, we have to become Julian Assange. We have to become Chelsea Manning. We have to become Edward Snowden and talk instead of them thinking what they would talk. Because this is just the start of a very long battle for freedom of press. If Julian Assange is extradited to the United States, they will come after you, they will come after you, they will come after everyone, and there will be no one else to speak in your name anymore. In the end, to quote a great German poet, Hölderlin, it might be a sad moment that we are here, but it's not a sad moment. We can see many people here, we can see masks here, we can see many supporters here. But as Hölderlin said, wo aber Gefahr ist, wächst das Rettende auch. It means, even if we are in deep shit, even if our democracies are not democracies anymore, even if institutions represented by the US Embassy, by the UK Embassy, which is just there, even if precisely these governments are undermining democracy, there is hope. There is hope as long as we can gather here, as long as we can give a voice to those who don't have a voice anymore. Free Chelsea Manning, free Julian Assange, free all the whistleblowers who are in prison today.